when they're doing the editing, they can edit out the long pause while the soup's cooking. Soup's cooking. Hi everyone, welcome to Home Cooked at Mac. I'm Kitty R. Lynn. This is my daughter Adrianne. She's a professor here at McMaster, and what we're going to be doing today is kind of explaining to you and showing you how to make a delicious pot of soup to share with your family, friends, roommates, etc. I've taught a few classes for McMaster. I'm the community food animator at Six Nations. The soup that we're doing today is called Twisted Sister, which is a take on Three Sisters soup. So Three Sisters soup is literally the soup that's made from corn, beans, and squash, which is the staple foods of the Haudenosaunee. There's a lot of different varieties of way it's done, depending on what nation you're from, which part of the country, which reserve you're on. Sometimes you see it with potatoes, and sometimes you see it with hot peppers. And I generally make it just with the vegetable, but it certainly can have meat added to it. And I do suggest you do a ground meat, a ground turkey, a ground chicken, if you have it, ground venison. That can be added to, but most often and most delicious, as far as I'm concerned, is just the vegetables. It's a Three Sister soup, and if you can see here, this is where we start with, and this is a really hard corn. You can't see it, but maybe you can hear it. It's very hard. That is our white corn. It's different than any other kind of corn because you don't pick it until October once it's hard. It is used in the summer as well because we'll pick it in August where for ceremony. It's called green corn then, and it's for green corn ceremony, but we generally leave it till it is hard and gone through a frost most often before you take it. And then it's braided and put and hung up to dry still longer. What you see here is this after has been put into a pot with boiling water and, I know it sounds awful, ashes. So you literally take the ashes from a hardwood fire, sift them 1, 2, 3, I do at least 7 times so that it's very fine and very, very smooth and there's nothing in it from the wood. You only can do hardwood. So hardwood ashes, because it's got a lot of lye. So it's called lied corn. Once it's here, you boil the water, put the ashes in, add your hard, dry white corn, and it removes the cover. I'm going to take one out. Removes that hard shell and makes this edible. So this corn was one of these at one time. Now, throughout the recipe, when I'm cooking it, I will talk to you things because this is not easy to get. It's more of a something that you're able to pick up or do on your own. So I will lye my own corn if I'm going to make it, and it takes about an hour for me because I've done it so often. But some people, it will take longer. And when I was going to be very hardcore one time and said, I want to do this the original way to start. I went to a very wonderful gentleman on our reserve, and he made me haul pails of water from the creek and build a fire. It took me from sunup until sundown to get one pot of corn. So it takes all day if you're doing it because you have to sift your ashes as you go along. You have to keep the fire going. It has to be a certain temperature. It has to keep boiling. There's a lot of work involved here. I'll tell you a little secret. Hominy from the grocery store will also work. In the South, Ongwahoe or Indigenous people will use hominy. It's just another version of the white corn, not the same, but another version, and the taste will still be similar, and it's still good for you. I'm going to talk about the squash. This is the butternut, and it's the easiest to use. I've got my professor here to do all of the peeling and chopping because that's actually the hardest part of this. The reason this is not a Three Sisters soup but Twisted Sister is because I add a bit of oil to it and I use greens. So we've got our corn already ready. I did that for you, but like I said, you can also use canned hominy. We didn't do the dried beans, we did canned because they probably don't want to spend 3 hours watching beans cook. and it's faster and easier. So the squash, there's no getting around it. You have to peel it. It has to be done, and this is what we start with. So Professor Xavier is going to start. Do you want to say anything about what you do, or other than be a soup assistant?
I'm a super good soup assistant.
Okay, so actually, Professor Xavier is a professor of Indigenous studies.
And anthropology.
And anthropology. I always forget that part. So we talked about the corn, we talked about the beans. The squash is now going to get peeled. Just do this portion of it. I also add green beans. Again, you can use canned. I prefer fresh, but you can use canned. And it's less expensive. Like sometimes if you're looking to make something that's not super expensive, imagine this. Ooh, that was very loud. So she did it just perfect. So this tells me that she does listen. When you're cutting your squash and you're making a pot of soup and you're only going to use a portion of it, don't cut down to where the seeds are. Because right now, this can go in the refrigerator just like this. Nothing on it because you don't want it to build up germs or anything. This will get a dry skin on it. But then you cut that off and you can still use this for something else. Mashed squash or something. But you have to not cut into where the seeds are. So the beans, unless you've grown beans yourself, the only thing you need to do to beans, I'm trying to find one that has a tip. This pointy little curly tip on there, that's the end of the bean. It doesn't need to come off. This end, however, where it's attached to the plant, you need to take that off. Some people, like where it was attached to the plant, some people will use scissors. I just snap them off. When you're making this Twisted Sister soup, I normally just do a little tiny bit of oil in the pan and then the chunks of squash. So you're going to want to cut that into chunks. If you look at this, beans, squash, corn, the sunflowers, and even the green beans, those are all things that would have been grown here. And interestingly enough, in a mound. So not necessarily all of it in a mound. A long, long time ago, the three sisters that I use in the Twisted Sister soup, we grew, Haudenosaunee people grew in a mound. So there would be corn in the center, and there's actually very lovely stories that go with it. So the three sister story of how the big sister is in the center holding her arms up, and the baby is growing around her feet, which is the beans, and climbs up, uses the corn to hold her up. And then around that is the middle sister, the squash, who is like a living protection for the other two. So animals and bugs won't go on the underside of squash leaves because they're prickly. And that prickle, if you do your hand under the leaf like this several times and pull it out, there'll be a raised, rashy red area because that middle sister is protecting her baby sister and her older sister. So I'm just going to put a little bit of oil in the bottom, about a tablespoon or two. And again, it depends on how much you're making. So if you're using 1 can of beans and 1 can of corn, and I'll just show you that really quickly. The hominy, because it can come in yellow or white, and this is golden, which is the yellow. If you're using that, you'll want to drain this and wash it. It has a can taste. It tastes like a can if you don't. Okay, so there's that. The nice part is, once you get all of your ingredients and you're making it yourself and you don't have me telling you stories, it's going to go fast. So you put your oil in, you put your chopped up squash, which by the way you can buy in the store already chopped up. You want your squash to make a sizzle noise when you throw it in, because you want it to get just a teeny tiniest bit kind of browny on the edges.
Now, I'm going to ask a question just because this is my preference, and I'm self-professed soup snob. If you were going to have people over for dinner, or you were prepping for the week of school and classes and stuff like that, you can make this on a Sunday and it would be great even on like Wednesday. Like, it tastes better the more days, right?
Yeah, so this is a soup that I quite often, because they most often tell you a soup should stay like 3 or 4 days in the refrigerator. I tell you right now, this one can stay in the refrigerator for 7 or 8 days and still be fabulous. It freezes like a dream. Okay, so we got a good sizzle going on in here. And I'll put that in. going to put the top on it because we're going to want that to cook a little bit. So we wash, the beans came out of the bag. It does say pre-washed. It's up to you. You can wash them again if you want to. And this is from our garden, but I'm going to show you a really cool trick. Now this can be Swiss chard, it can be spinach, it can be any kind of green. Like I said, the lettuces that's in your fridge that's getting on the wilty side, not good for salad, but good for soup. I'm going to put you in charge of this so they don't stick. Oh. The coveted spoon. So when you have your greens, whether it's Swiss chard or kale, you washed this morning, right?
Yeah.
Why is it so wet? What I do is I grab it from the stem at the bottom and I gather the leaf.
Nothing's sticking, I swear.
I just want to look. Okay. You grab it from here and you just pull up. And see that piece right there? I chop those really fine in a blender. And when you're making meatballs or a meatloaf or a cream soup.
I'm sorry, what?
Then you put them.
You keep those? Okay.
They-
We'll talk about that later. Cool. That's a great cooking tip.
They can also be ground up and go into smoothies. Every part of it is edible. It's just not fun to chew into these when you're having soup because you want them to be ground up. So I'm just going to pull this over here, make my pile of leaves there. Again, take that stem. You definitely want to do this when you do Swiss chard because the Swiss chard stem is very thick. Okay, so I'm gonna ask you to put one of those glasses of water in with there because I have the feeling that it's not going to cook quick enough otherwise. Okay, it's going to really sizzle. Get ready, go. Did you hear that growl? You want that growl. So that growl tells you that it's going to start cooking that faster. You've got friends coming over. You guys are supposed to study and you were in charge of getting the food. So here you are throwing a soup together. Because like I said, if you keep the things on hand for this soup can literally be thrown together in like 10 minutes. Because this can also be torn into chunks. I like to cut it because it makes a nicer soup.
Fancy also.
And then people, look at that nice thing you did. I do green beans as well as, and when you're halfway through cooking your squash, you can throw them in. Not going to put a whole bunch of those in. Okay. Okay, let's take a look and see how this looks in here. It looks quite pretty. Like I said, no salt and pepper goes in there, and you can season at the table, but you'll find that it really doesn't need any kind of seasoning. So your squash is cooking, the beans are cooking, and normally I will let those cook a little bit till they're really soft. We saved a bit back, and you can probably throw them in because you can also pull this out. If you are a purist, you cook your squash first and then throw in your beans. We're going to add a few more, and why there's the staggered amount is because then you have squash that cooks away and thickens the broth, and squash that stays in the chunks. So if you like a more clear broth, you just cook them all at the same time. Let's take a look at our stuff here. Take this off the burner. Okay, so I'm just going to scoop a bit of that out so you can see. So, you hold that? Yep. I'll show you how to know if it's time. See, they're pretty well done. The small ones are done, the bigger ones aren't, which is why you try to cut them as uniform as possible. If I was going to puree this, even though it's a little bit hard, I would puree it right now. Some of them are softer than others. So far, we've only put about a cup of water in there. So go ahead and put that back on. Yes. And we have water over there, if you don't mind using that 2-cup measuring cup, adding 2 more cups of water. There is a recipe that will come with this, and it's a little bit different than what I'm talking about now, but it's the idea of how to do it. I've been making soup for 3 times as long as most of you have been alive. So I do it without recipes. They had to follow me around and copy my recipes as I made them. Okay, so far we have about 3 cups of water in there. I think that's plenty because we're going to add the beans and the corn, but you'll be able to tell better when you're looking at it. So now this one here, I make a mean corn soup too, which is just corn, and I use smoked turkey and beans, and she's not a fan of it, but she will eat mine. Some people's is a little more thin than others, but this soup in particular was really good because imagine Professor Xavier, not quite 3 years old, trotting out of her room.
Just shorter.
Just shorter, yeah. Coming out of her room, looks at me and says, "Muzzer, I a vegetarian." I'm like, oh, good. What does that mean? And she explained to it because she sat and read all about it because she learned how to read when she was 2. And so she explained it. So for almost 2 years, I had to fight to get proteins into her because that's at that age, you need lots of proteins. And also at young adult, you need lots of proteins. So the beans are high in protein. I used to make a really fun gingerbread cake that had beans in it that she did not realize until she was in her 30s.
Why would I think that cake had beans in it? Like, really? What is the thing where I'm like, unless it's called bean cake, which don't get me wrong, I love them. Bean cakes are great. But nobody said, hey, have bean cake for breakfast.
I know, but
What
I made.
did they say? Have cake.
Yeah, I made gingerbread cake and I put pretty designs on the top of it with a little
So
bit
how
of.
many times have I eaten kale?
I'm not sure. We don't need to talk about that right now.
Okay.
So I'm waiting for this to come back to a boil. Then guess what? We're literally going to add all of our ingredients back. Like I said, I'm not going to use the hominy. I'm going to actually use the white corn that we have. It's not quite ready. I'm being very impatient. And maybe we'll just stand here and when they're
It's
doing
not going anywhere.
when they're doing the editing, they can edit out the long pause while
Where
the
we're
soup.
like,
Soup's cooking. Soup's cooking. This has now been boiling long enough, and I will show you how to know. And it didn't take very long. It doesn't take very long. And we'll talk.
it takes longer if you stare at it, just like anything,
Yeah.
right?
So if you take note, the knife goes into it like it's very soft. If you like a creamy, thick soup, pull out half of that now, puree it in a blender, and then hang on till to the end. We've got our squash in there and our green beans, and now we're going to add our different kinds of kidney beans. There's that goopy part I told you about that's really good for you because that's where all the vitamins end up in a can. Who knew? When you're eating the bean, if you wash them, you're getting just fiber, which is good for you because everybody needs fiber. But if you want the nutrients, you have to also eat that part.
It's the best part anyway.
Yes, it is the best part. So I'm going to use a lot of corn in it, probably most of this. And remember, this is our white corn, our Haudenosaunee white corn, but you can also use the hominy. I might add the rest of that in a bit. Okay, we'll give that a stir. Grow my legs a little bit more. Okay.
Does that work?
I don't know, it hasn't worked so far. I've stayed the same height forever. Yeah. So this is very close. I'm adding just a tiny bit more water so we have, you'll notice that literally nothing else has gone into this pot except for corn, beans, and squash. 3 kinds of beans, but nothing else has gone in there. So I think we're probably, yeah, it's coming back to a boil very quickly. So now if you remember, I took the stalks out. Now we have just leaves, and here's where it becomes not the Three Sister soup, but the Twisted Sister. So anytime you add something to Three Sister soup, it's not a Three Sister soup anymore. So this will come back to a boil, which this almost has, and then guess what? It's time. It's time for us to put it in a sweet little bowl for you to try. Kale doesn't take very long to cook, and I don't know if you noticed when I was chopping it up that I crunched it quite hard because you want your kale to have, your body can't digest it if you don't mash it up first. So cooking it helps with that, but you have to mash it. So we can take a look at our hard work. I'll lay a spoon right there because I was taught that the bowl could break. Here we go.
Is that because it's like a long time ago it was like an earthenware bowl?
I don't know. maybe. And this one is quite brothy. Like I said, if you prefer a soup that's not as brothy, you can puree part of the,
I would do the squash.
yeah, you like it better. So there we go. There it is. There's our white beans, our green beans, our kidney beans, our squash, our kale, and our corn. It'll sustain you. And guess what? This is the best part. It's delicious. Have a great time with your soup.
Oh, I don't know. Okay, fine.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again soon. Bye.